Hello, everybody. Welcome to the November 21st TZM Global Radio Show. This is Peter Joseph. I hope everyone's doing well out there. That was an introduction from Zeitgeist Requiem for One from the 2011 Zeitgeist Media Festival. I thought it was appropriate because of the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday and Black Friday, which is a very disgusting tradition in the United States, where all the brainwashed consumers line up to buy TVs and various gadgetry from 12 a.m. on the Friday following Thanksgiving. And evidently the statistics this year are even more powerful than they have been in prior years, which is completely interesting to me given the general economic downturn, which I guess shows on one level a sense of desperation, but yet simultaneously shows how people really haven't gotten it yet with respect to what consumer culture actually means. About 150 million people are expected to buy something this Friday. That's almost half of the entire United States population, manipulated for corporate profit to borrow money on credit and likely buy things they don't need. I have been doing a lot of investigation on the subject of consumerism recently because the new Culture and Decline episode I'm trying to get done by December 1st is all about vanity and consumerism. And it's very, very fascinating what happened in the early 20th century, I have to admit. It's not to say that we really had the ability to produce a complete abundance back then, given the state of technology, but all the seeds were there. Just a quick qualification, when I say abundance, I don't mean a utopian abundance of everything to infinity. We're talking about abundance of meeting the needs of the human population. But in the early 20th century, you had a number of factors come into play due to the efficiency generated by technology. For one, industrial methods were improving with mechanization and machine tools where a surplus was generated of general goods. In other words, people really didn't have the need to buy this surplus. Therefore, there was a saturation in the market, and of course, that's never a good thing. The second thing was the longevity of the goods themselves. Design itself of particular goods was improving, therefore the lifespan of goods was increasing. This was also very problematic for a cyclical consumption economy. I don't want to go through actually all of that because I've said it till I'm blue in the face, and it's so fundamental. But naturally, you need scarcity and inefficiency for the market economy to work. The enemy of the market economy is competency, basically. So generally speaking, there were two paths society could take at this point. We could kind of preserve the beauty of the ingenuity of technology and new social change. We would shorten the work week. We would compensate hourly wages to match them up. We would produce the best we possibly could. We would increase leisure time. And who knows, an age of enlightenment could have been born where people were not so hard-pressed, and as they are today, working more hours than ever. All the neuroses that has come forward and the stress, and again, I'm not going to go into a lecture mode here, but you can see how society really could have transcended the material culture pretty much at that point. It would have been profound if you really think about how if we had just engaged society in the right way to bring uplifting values of community and contribution, relating success to something about relationship as opposed to gain and value and profit and detachment and exploitation, the world could have changed, but it didn't. Instead of following the path of technology and basically trying to create a form of human freedom never before seen, people got together in the corporate elite and they decided that they wanted to maintain the status quo. Not necessarily unexpected, right? The entire philosophy of the ownership business class, of course, is to respect corporate contracts and the corporate liability to shareholders, which means to maximize profits at all time. So the value system disorder was already firmly in place within the major powers. So the last thing the corporate constituency wanted to do was to alleviate the general commercial ethic, the ethos that had been in play for so long, the submission to labor, cyclical consumption, the class divisions. This would be very problematic for a ruling elite, wouldn't you say? So at that point in time, there was a great deal of study being done on human behavior and psychology. People like Freud and many others are coming forward with interesting theories, very primitive and basic now, almost juvenile when you think about them in hindsight. But nevertheless, they existed and they did have validity to a certain effect, and they were harnessed and utilized. The social nature, more specifically, was exploited of people. So people's status, their relationship to each other, gender roles, individualism, self-representation, and things like this started to permeate all advertising, which prior to the 20th century was really just about utility. It was about describing goods, what they did, in fact, probably what advertising will be in the future once we get over this hurdle of bullshit that we call consumer normality today. But nevertheless, it worked. And if you couple in things like planned obsolescence, which were formalized and codified, where, forget just having things that last, let's strategize and have things fail and have a lifespan that matches marketing and the need for consumption. I think, in fact, there's a guy named Bernard Lundin, if I remember correctly, who wrote a pamphlet called Planned Obsolescence to End the Depression. This guy wanted to make it a legal mandate to give all goods a short lifespan to ensure cyclical consumption. Now, if you were to talk that way today, considering where we are with sustainability, even in the most, right-wing conservative mentalities, no one would ever even ponder that. But that gives you a sense of where we were at that point in time. And the final component I'll throw in here, since I'm already on this little tirade, is the credit issue. Credit expansion took hold. Unlike any time in human history, we've always had credit and debt. It's always been a tool of elitism. It's always been something that ensured class division. And to keep the peasants at bay, the tool of debt is one of the most insidious ideas ever created. But consumer or better I should say, private and public debt across the board was never in the percentages of growth that we've seen in the past per capita or even, by institution. If you were to just, even through inflation, you can't even come close to looking at the rates of growth of debt and the constant loaning and multiplying of money we see in the world today. In fact, I think it's a fair thing to say, a safe thing to say, that within the past 100 years, the entire fundamental driver of economic growth in and of itself has not been productivity of industry. It has not been anything having to do with any material issue. It has been at its core root the constant and deliberate expansion of credit and debt. And as has been talked about again at length, the chickens come home to roost eventually, and the sea of collapsing debt has not even begun. As a brief aside, since it just popped into my mind, since we've been talking from the wilderness, for the past 5 years in the Zeitgeist Movement, I watched a movie called Surviving Progress recently, and it was partially produced by Martin Scorsese, which is a very, very big wig in the Hollywood community, which means that this film really has a lot of big people behind it. And everything that this film put forward is almost verbatim of what the movement and related institutions have talked about. This is becoming normal, and they did a whole thing on debt and everything else, and people are beginning to wake up to this stuff. And they foreshadow the exact same thing that was described in Zeitgeist Moving Forward, that you can't possibly expect true economic growth, which means material development and sustainable development, to occur parallel to a system that's generating overflowing debt that can never, ever be repaid. Okay, I think I've fulfilled my quota of rambling. The two main issues I want to discuss in this broadcast are Zeitgeist Day and the Orientation Guide. Let's begin with Zeitgeist Day. Zeitgeist Day is set for the weekend of March 16th, 2013, with the main event this year in Los Angeles, California, the United States, on Sunday, March 17th. We might do something on March 16th, I'm not quite sure, but Sunday will be the main event day. More information will be posted soon, along with the ability to get seats. This is going to be a relatively small event, I have to warn everybody. On average, we've had about 1,000 people every single event for the main event for Zeitgeist Day for the past 5 years. However, this event is going to be approached in a conservative manner, so it's not a lot of overflow, with a very specific focus on organization, community involvement, and essentially the video edit of it in the end. The event itself is important. We're working to get press. That's where the majority of the budget goes. But as far as education is concerned, the vast majority of people, of course, see this back online. So we're going to approach this in a way that makes it most conducive for an online or video audience. As far as chapters are concerned, in making your own Zeitgeist Day event, which on average we've had about 300 to 400 each year, the main porthole for Zeitgeist Day is zdayglobal.org. But tzmchapters.net, which is a new chapter site, will also probably have some important information. And actually, most important of all of this, which I'm going to get to at length, is the new orientation guide, which will be complete by that point, ideally completely complete by the end of the year. Some of you out there I know are very frustrated with this reality, but please understand the orientation guide, in what it attempts to accomplish, is enormously complex. In fact, I'll just jump into this right now. I'm going to leave Zeitgeist Day for now. We'll talk about it more so in future broadcasts, but let's talk about the new orientation guide, the first part of which has been completed and will be online very soon, probably within 1 or 2 days. It was supposed to be up by now, but we're trying to get the formatting right for the website. But you can download a PDF of this first section. There are 4 parts to the new orientation guide, minus the appendices and supplemental lectures. The first part, which will be online, is really just an introduction. It's a 30-some page introduction to what the entire premise of the movement is about. The second part is going to deal with the social pathological nature and the anti-economy. We're going to talk about public health, the actual evolution of economy. It's very important that people understand what happened from the Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Malthus period, and where these values and associations came from and how this tradition has come forward. We're going to talk about market efficiency versus technical efficiency, the developmental value system disorder, which is so rampant today, and of course structural classism, war, conflict, and lots of other issues that relate to the sickness and toxic nature of the economic system we have. Part 3 of the guide will go right into sustainability and the train of thought that the movement advocates. What true economic variables mean, what the design revolution that has come forward actually implies, the nature of industry, what a true market is, and I don't mean market of buying and selling, but a market of ideas. We'll talk about government, security, and of course we'll enter into the idea of a structured, natural law, resource-based economy, the alleviation of needless complexity, assumptions of utopia, and the sort of chaos of the human organism and how we have to be a little bit more balanced in the way we think about things. That is part 3, and then in part 4, the final part, which defines the Zeitgeist Movement more so. We'll talk about the state of affairs today, the revolution of values that's necessary as far as transition, applications of the Global Redesign Institute, things like mutual credit systems and time banks to begin transition. It will also talk about a hybrid system and things that can be done now in an attempt to kind of bridge where we need to go, even possibly within the corporate structure. A lot of speculation, but it's definitely food for thought. As with anything, ladies and gentlemen, every document you read is a live document. There's no firm philosophy. And if anyone ever comes up to you and tells you they have the ultimate solution or they have the plan to solve everything, make sure you run away from them as fast as possible. In the end, if we expect to make any real change, it's going to have to be somewhat incremental, and it can be done. If there's anything that I've noticed over time, and I think many of you have noticed over time, it's a growing awareness of the ecological and social destabilization of society that is at hand. Again, going back to this major documentary I saw called Surviving Progress, which really, in effect, is one of hundreds of new documentaries that are taking the reins to see that there's something desperately wrong. Now, you can argue the solutions that are proposed. Very rarely will they propose the abolition of the entire economic system like the Zeitgeist Movement does in other institutions. But it's at least a stepping stone, and if we really want to be realistic about things, we can't walk around using this broad rhetoric about the way things should be and, declaring all the Earth's resources as common heritage to all the world's people. It's sort of like saying, well, we need world peace, and we're going to get world peace by deciding to have world peace. This is a very complicated arena, and it's something that all of us in our group mind capacity needs to begin to think about. Anyway, before I stumble upon another tangent, that more or less summarizes what should be, again, about 100 and some pages for the new orientation guide, which will eventually be translated into about 25 different videos, because this is about 25 different essays. That's another thing to point out. The essay nature of this guide is very, very specific and heavily sourced. There's heavy, heavy sourcing throughout this entire document, which hopefully will inspire more people to investigate these issues. And for those that keep asking why this took so long, the original orientation guide, the 70-page orientation guide that was based essentially on the Venus Project at that point in time, was reviewed and eventually just thrown out. It's not specific enough to actually generate the type of focal points needed to perpetuate this in the community. The ability for people to learn how to speak on these issues and become authoritative enough where they have confidence and they understand it obviously enough to actually address the history of economy, to address the foundations of sustainability, to address what the monetary market economy really has been doing, to address human behavior, psychological attributes that have come forward. These elements really need to be clear, and they're really not that hard. I hope people aren't afraid of those issues that want to go out and speak. And coming back to Zeitgeist Day 2013, this new guide, I hope, is a blueprint for a new lecture team, one that we have desperately been seeking. We have a lot of great people there, but we need more. So once this document is complete, we will create a supplemental document that will help in the communication of these ideas, and a think tank of sorts, if you will, and a vocabulary hopefully will come forward that can enable a larger group of people to begin to express these ideas without feeling like they have to relegate them. I don't know if you guys have figured this out about me, but the last thing in the world that I ever want is for someone to say, well, that's because what Peter Joseph says, or that's because what the Zeitgeist Movement says, or by extrapolation, that's because the Venus Project does this, or because Buckminster Fuller did that, or whatever. If you can't digest this, harness it, and communicate it from your own accord, no one owns ideas, no one invents anything in the intellectual sense. Remember, there's no proprietary relationship to knowledge. And if people really understood that, they would begin to absorb it in a way that would make it novel to them, novel to their culture, novel to their community, in other words, and they'll be able to communicate it in a novel way with a higher degree of efficacy. So I'm not going to belabor that either, but I will end this point by saying that the new orientation, I think, is the backbone of the new Zeitgeist Day event. And I want people to really tailor their Zeitgeist Day event to digesting this new document and investigating it and building lectures out around it. Frankly, I can't find anything more relevant to discuss than the issue of communication and how we have to develop a stronger concerted effort for communication in and of itself. It will not suffice just to hand off some DVD or some pamphlet. A skill set has to be developed in chapter communities where people are able to harness this data and expand upon it. Again, that's what the group mind is. That is the nature and definition of progress. No one owns knowledge or information. It is transmitted and developed serially through all of us. And if we really understand that, I think our motivation to learn and the like would be a lot more powerful. Anyway, all of that aside, I'd like to conclude the broadcast by describing the Global Redesign Institute. A few weeks back, I went on Abby Martin's show, Breaking the Set, and in fact, as far as Russia Today is concerned, which has been very supportive of the movement overall, this interview had a focus that I think was the most acute of all the interviews prior, and she actually kind of got to the core of issues. And by the end of the broadcast, I described the Global Redesign Institute as a way of trying to explain to the audience that we need to be more solution-oriented. And when that happened, I received a large number of emails and inquiries about what this actually is, even though I've discussed it in passing before. So I want to clarify this a little bit. Excuse me. So ultimately, the Global Redesign Institute is to say, okay, we're going to put values aside, we're going to put all the things aside that are common to the movement's rhetoric and focus only on the technicals in and of itself, and show the world what is possible technically in what you would call a macro-industrial approach, transportation, city orientation, how you would design, for example, the most energy-efficient transport infrastructure you could for a specific region based on the specific population, show where the fundamental food and nutrition could come from without using globalization, showing how all of these things can be localized. It's nothing new. People have talked about this type of idea for years, but it's never been applied. So the beauty of this approach is that it's actually going to show problem solving in advance, based on current patterns and statistics existing in a region prior. So when you look at, for example, Los Angeles, California, United States, one of the most congested and overrun major metropolitan areas probably in the world. In fact, as an aside, I was driving the other day and I was realizing what an incredibly dumb idea it is for people to show up at work at 9 a.m. and then leave at 5 a.m. Let's get everybody on the streets at the same period of time every day. Brilliant. I do hope in a transitional model, people, since most people work behind computers anyway, that people will start to work from home. God, the energy footprint is so wasteful and excessive out there because of this horrid tradition of labor and these rigid time slots. But that's an aside. I'm trying to avoid tangents today. But since the statistics and most patterns of normality, we can criticize those in and of themselves, as I've just pointed out. But given what is happening now, what people are familiar with, if you show them how much more easy life could be with those existing patterns, building models to create problem resolution and further integrity of the social organization through these macro-industrial changes, I think you'd pull a lot of people along. Underlying design principles would be the resolution of poverty, to localize all basic production regionally. Overall, the philosophy of more with less in general, to reorganize infrastructure, to show the fundamental problems we see in society can be resolved with respect to poverty, food, energy, infrastructure, and the like. This, of course, is not to deny the global relevance and the need to really think globally when it comes to a lot of these issues as far as resources specifically, carrying capacity, all of those fundamental issues. This is a transitional idea to show people what's possible so they can become interested in a world that's based on efficiency and not the movement of money. So people come to this and they say, this is amazing, I'd like to live in this environment, this makes perfect sense to me. Even if it's not ideal, we're talking transition, and then you say, well, we can do this, but unfortunately you're not going to get this out of the market economy, and boom, the light bulbs should go off. I really believe that if you have conferences that are localized with people that know their region, and you're showing them how to improve their society directly and solve problems technically, that this is the best way to get people on board to not a political resolution, not towards a political resolution anymore, which we want to get beyond, but a technical resolution. And the form and contribution of this, as has been alluded to before at globalredesigninstitute.org, a platform will be set up where the entire Earth is mapped out. Different layers, API layers they're called, will be set in programming, and a Wikipedia-style data entry, graphically in many ways, will be implemented. The complexity of this is pretty obvious to those that deal with programming, even though you have Google Earth and a lot of other systems out there that have similar processes already. This is going to take a very unique type of input system and something that obviously will have to be custom coded. The launching of this will happen with a core team of programmers initially, and again, it's going to be expensive, as much as I hate to say it, but we'll take that as it comes. This isn't going to be something that hopefully will require money as far as contribution. It's open to everybody, but this type of programming is going to be very, very difficult. It's a very, very ambitious idea. Though we're going to try and work with pre-existing code that's already in existence. There's tons and tons of planetary survey programs and mappings out there from NASA to many other many other institutions. So we're going to work with what we have again. So I could go on a lot of different tangents about this, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. I also want to point out that the forum, the Zeitgeist Movement Forum.org, it's already online, but it's going to launch for public interaction fairly soon. Right now, it's a population and formatting issue. We're bringing the forum back. We took the forum down when the entire global site was shifted. There was just too many problems that were happening on both a technical level and a participation level. But the beauty of what's happened over the course of the past year, as we mentioned the 5th annual Zeitgeist Day, is we've weeded out a lot of the noise. A lot of people came to the movement early on with a bunch of varying interpretations. There were disheartening events such as the Venus Project debacle and other issues where people decided to disperse. We had Occupy. I know a lot of people that felt that Occupy was more apparent for change, which is largely not true. Occupy never had a solution plan. I really do hope people in Occupy, if anyone listening is from Occupy, will begin to see the merit of what the movement is. There's nothing that the Occupy movement talks about or intends that isn't already within the Zeitgeist Movement's activism organization. An enormous amount of integrity rests on the fact, in fact, the mere fact, how many times did I say fact in a row? In fact, the mere fact that we are on the 5th annual Zeitgeist Day. Most social movements either barely exist or they exist for a little while with a great deal of attention, like Occupy, and they quickly dissipate. The movement is held strong. The people that really understand this have waded through all the noise, and I think it's actually a very, very powerful place to be. While we do need quantity and in heavy numbers, it's going to have to start with quality, of course. And for anyone that's familiar with our materials, you realize how hard it is to get some of these points across with the indoctrinated culture around us. So, I guess my broad point here is that I'm happy with the way things are. We've shedded a lot of noise, and we're only going to grow stronger if people continue to have the focus and the necessity of what needs to be communicated and what needs to be done as far as projects. To put it in my own words, the Zeitgeist Movement hasn't even started. We're talking about an organization that cannot just pop in with some blueprint in a matter of years to gain the proficiency and efficiency needed. It's going to take more years to get this thing to a level that the integrity is so strong, where the communication becomes so easy, where the involvement becomes so simple. And that's something else that we'll talk about in chapter meetings in the future, is the automation of data. When people come into the movement's website, they shouldn't have to feel like they need to contact a bunch of other people to understand what's going on. It should all be crystal clear in PDF and video form. And the pressure of all of our admins needs to subside. I don't even want to think about the number of hours I have spent just kind of interacting with people in circumstances where they really should have just kind of followed our website and figured it out for themselves. This is very, very important as an aside. So if you run a website, do your best to make it so that everything is readily apparent. So you don't have to waste time. None of us make any money on this. None of us are being paid. There's nothing that fuels this other than your time and your energy and your out-of-pocket expenses. The Zeitgeist Movement doesn't take any donations, and it doesn't advocate such, maybe small projects. Maybe in the sense of large projects at the Global Redesign Institute, something may happen in a one-shot deal. I'm not sure. It really comes down to what kind of programming needs that we have. But it can be done, and I won't go on a tangent about established institutions, what happens to institutions that use donations and money. I could make a lot of examples out there, from human rights to animal rights to child rights. Roughly 30 to 40% of what's donated to these organizations, these major organizations, goes into their pockets for first-class plane tickets and for general survival. So that's the contradiction of activism that's based on the market economy. And I find it to be a lot more insidious than people realize, using activism as a business. Anyway, that's it from me today. I hope everyone's doing good out there. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, and look for your emails for the new orientation guide and other updates. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.